this man. I'm telling you, ladies, send your kids out of the room because I want you to take a look at Bam Bam Bigelow.
There's no one who doesn't know Bam Bam Bigelow. And if they don't know his name, if they see the face and the head, they know it.
His entire head was aflame. So he started doing the flames on his suits and his boots, and you'd look out into the audience and the flame everywhere.
Bam! Oh, wow!
He was just massive, but so athletic, so quick.
Bammer did it almost like a ballet dancer.
Bigelow can move for a big man, and he knows what he's doing in there.
Look at this 400-pound man doing flips, cartwheels, and going through the ring. This is crazy.
In his time in the 80s, nobody was like him. Like, this isn't right. It wasn't just Rookie of the Year, it was Phenomenon of the Year.
Bam Bam Bigelow!
Arriving on the scene like a force of nature, Bam Bam Bigelow catapulted to the top of the wrestling world and never looked back.
You need a little excitement!
When you've been on top in WWE and then you're on tippity top in ECW, you know, they beat the out of each other.
Wrestling rewarded Bam Bam's talents with money and fame, but those rewards came with a heavy price.
All the wear and tear, and you're not going to feel it right away, but it's coming.
And that's when it changed, and everything spiraled out of control.
You're selling your body, you're selling your health to have fame, fortune, and everything that goes with it.
People had mouths to feed. So guys did what they had to do to earn their living.
He was in pain, and there was a doctor involved that was willing to take that away, and things went downhill from there.
But Bam Bam's addictions eventually pushed him beyond the point of redemption, destroying everything he loved.
A trusted professional gave him the thing that was his biggest demise. This doctor could have had a loaded machine gun to our family, and it would have been no different. No different.
So, just digging through the vast archives, we have Dad's calendar. And then if you go to November 15th, 1987, he got married. And then, you know, not even taking a honeymoon, like he had a day off, and then he was in Des Moines, Iowa. This is literally the first 4 days of his career with the WWF in 1987.
He definitely wanted kids right away. He was like, I just want to stay home and raise the kids. You could go to work, go to school, do what you want to do. And he was more excited about being a dad than he was when he got WrestleMania. Hi, I'm Dana Breckenridge. I was married to Bam Bam Bigelow. And when Richie came, I mean, that was the best thing ever, because all he ever really wanted was a daughter.
Oh yeah, he was a giant teddy bear. What fans saw in the ring was not at all what we saw at home. It was love, it was playing around. My name is Richie Bigelow, and my father is Bam Bam Bigelow. He had this giant, giant bed that we would all cuddle up in and just jump around. Yeah, it was a great time.
When you think of your dad, what's the first memory that comes to mind?
It was the last time I saw him. We were just driving in the car, and I was 2 or 3 years old, but I remember seeing his head slowly drop to his chest and then come back up. And whenever I think back on how I went about the situation, I'm always so baffled because I was so young. But in some way, I understood that we were in some sort of danger. And as a toddler, I went into panic mode. I gotta go to the bathroom, I gotta get out, Daddy, pull over, I can't. So he pulled over on the side of the road, and he looked at me and gave me this big toothless smile. He's like, come on, like, do you have to go? Like, it was just on the side of the road. And I was like, no, but kind of stalling. And then we just got back on the road, and it started happening again. This time we were by a diner, and we pulled into that diner, and the next thing I know, my car door was opened, and a man just scooped me up and put me in the back of this gray car. And from the back seat, I watched them take my dad in handcuffs across. That was it. My mom came and picked me up, and she was real gentle about it. And she told me, you're probably not going to be seeing Daddy anymore. He needs help. And that was the last time I saw him.
He wanted to be a wrestler, but he wanted to be a father more. And everything was taken away. So was wrestling what took it away, or was Scott and all the other outside influences what took it away? Like, how did this happen?
Here we go. This is Dad, his sophomore year in high school.
Oh my God.
Right, they were Class A North champions, 20-6. That's probably the last time you'll see him with hair.
Everything around Asbury Park is Bruce Springsteen. The sound of Bruce Springsteen is everywhere and in everything that we did when we grew up on the shore. Scott was a street kid from Neptune who hung out in the bars of Asbury, driving the circuit in muscle cars. For our age and our crowd, he was definitely the man. You know what? He was probably the kindest, most genuine person of the group. We were friends, and it was just a progression, and then it was a whirlwind. We were street kids. Nobody thought about where they were going. I didn't go to college. My friends didn't go to college. He didn't go to college.
God, the Jersey Shore was like the party place to be. I was running a club called Club Xanadu in Asbury Park, New Jersey. The club is actually 1 block from the Stone Pony. And in the middle was this place called Quack Quack. It's DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, and I know Bam Bam because I'm from the Jersey Shore. I roll into the Quack Quack, and I see this mammoth kid. And at some point, we're doing shots, and we just kind of clicked, but I think he was 17 at the time, but no one cared because he looked like a full-grown man. He was, 300-plus pounds, and he could obviously be very menacing, but he also had that fun side to him. And they were calling him the Beast from the East back then.
He was a football player, and he was ranked in the state for wrestling. I mean, he was feared on the mat and on the football field.
This was the time when heavyweight in high school wrestling was unlimited. So you're talking about a 320-pound teenager who can bench 500 pounds walking onto a mat. I'm Shane Bigelow, and my father's Bam Bam Bigelow. I heard a story from a high school wrestling coach that my father rolled his ankle real bad and he couldn't wrestle, but his coach was just like, Scotty, I need you to just go up there and just look mean. So he gets up, he steps on the scale, he turns to the kid and he just gives him this big flex. It's just like, I'm coming for you. Lo and behold, this kid is shitting his pants. So he tells his coach, I'm not wrestling this guy. He's gonna rip my head off. All my father had to do, he hopped out on one leg, got his hand raised, and took the win.
Yeah, there was a group of the boys, and they were rough drinking, tattooed, like old sailors, but not sailors, they were roofers. And they were very infamous around town.
Him and his brothers used to jump off of billboards onto mattresses on the side of the road. When my grandmother would drive past, she'd be like, oh, look at those kids. And then she'd realize that it was her 3 boys jumping onto like 5 mattresses piled high.
Scott was very quiet. He was the baby of the bunch. They usually only called him in when they needed the extra muscle.
Ed heard he got into a fight, he bit some kid's ear off. It's like, what? But it's part of the legend that went with the Beast from the East.
Tough dude, ran with rugged people. He was all that in a bag of chips, man. He was a bad apple when he wanted to be. I am Taz, former ECW World Heavyweight Champion and former opponent of Bam Bam Bigelow.
Bam Bam Bigelow all over Taz.
I've heard all the stories about Bigelow, and I believe them all.
There's a whole separate legend before the legend Bam Bam Bigelow ever became the legend. My name is Scott Colton Bigelow, and Bam Bam Bigelow is my father. I know that he was a bounty hunter for a short stint. I don't know much about the backstory of it.
I guess I was about 18, 19 years old. You see an ad for bounty hunter, and basically just picked up bail jumpers, beat up a lot of people, and then wind up going to Mexico to get a little girl that was kidnapped.
He was supposedly commissioned to go and bring back a young girl who was taken out of the country.
In the whole Mayday and craziness of the thing, his bounty hunting partner ends up getting shot in the neck and killed. And that's when my dad spent 6 months in a Mexican prison.
I heard he ended up in jail, Mexico, So you just hear little bits and pieces. And with Scotty, they could be exaggerated.
The story is he befriended the judge because he used to run through the walls that were made out of like the terracotta clay. He used to just break through the cells of the walls so they couldn't keep him in. So the judge one day apparently goes to him and asks him, he goes, I need security from all these cartel, mob, whatever guys. So you stand in front of me and you stop these maniacs from like lunging at me and trying to kill me, and I'll knock your sentence down. So the story is that a judge took pity on my father because my father saved him from a bunch of guys trying to jump over and stab him, and he ended up letting him loose early.
He's basically a New Jersey legend. There's a story that one night, house is on fire, he's driving by, runs in and saves some kids.
He pulled over, ran in the house and saved the kids. That sounds like a TV movie. It doesn't sound like stuff that really happens, you know, and there were a lot of stories like that, just out there floating around. I'm Shane Douglas, and I had the pleasure of being partners in the triple threat with Bam Bam Bigelow.
Who's the world champion?
You know, as I'd heard that he got arrested, I guess, in Mexico. You know, that sounds implausible. Then, like, over years, you'd hear other people repeating these stories and just elevated that legend that was Bam Bam.
You know, getting out of the joint, there's no jobs, you know? So I was bouncing, partying, hanging out with the boys.
Here comes Bam Bam in the club. This is like 81-ish, and it's packed, and my club was nice. And I see Bam roll in with like 3 of his biker buddies, and I come rolling up behind him, put my arm around his back. I'm like, yo, Bammer, like, no trouble in here tonight, right, bro? Oh, come on, Paige, I wouldn't do that to you. And at some point, we're at the bar, and I got the guys a shot, and wrestling comes up. And, you know, I said, I tried that in 79. He goes, you tried wrestling? I said, but I had 3 matches. My 3rd match, I hurt my knee, and I kind of got swept away by the booze, the broads, and the party. But talking to him about it, I'm like, dude, you're a natural. He goes, that would be a pie in the sky dream for me.
It just got to the point where, well, where's my life gonna go? You know, I don't have a college education. My gift was being athletically inclined, and so I went to a wrestling school, which was Larry Sharp's school in Monster Factory at the time. The rest is history.
So Larry Sharp was a former amateur wrestler who opened up the Monster Factory. My name's Dave Meltzer. I'm the editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and I've been covering pro wrestling since 1971. And one day, I guess Bam Bam walked in the door, and Larry saw, like everyone did, money.
And he became Scott's manager, set him up on a couch, threw him in the ring, and trained him.
I wind up staying out there at the Monster Factory, living out there, basically eating it, living it, sleeping it for a year.
I saw footage of him coming out of the Monster Factory. You could tell, like, his aptitude to learn how to do this and get better at this, his athleticism. It jumped out to me right away. I mean, seeing a guy like that, you know, a guy that big, you know, do a cartwheel, I was like, wow, he's super impressive.
For Scott, professional wrestling, it's like a double-edged sword. It gave him life and it took his life. That's the ultimate double edge, isn't it?
In 1985, Scott Bigelow was on the brink of stardom, having made a clean break from a troubled past.
When he went to the Monster Factory with Larry Sharp, Larry really developed the name Bam Bam with Scott. Bam Bam, the strong babyface. You're like Bam Bam from the Flintstones. So he became Bam Bam Bigelow.
Probably the most handsome wrestler on the face of the earth.
The massive head of Bam Bam and that big flame ball on that head, that tattoo. Who gets ink on their head has got to be crazy. Nevertheless, their whole head, for those that never got a tattoo, they hurt as much as they think, okay? This guy got his skull tattooed. Just imagine how much pain and how many hours that took to do. This was the branding of Bam Bam Bigelow.
See, people love to hate, and as long as they want to hate me, I know I'm doing my job.
And it kind of just sent that message to the fans and to other wrestlers. That's a bad dude right there.
And Bam, do you have anything to say about all this?
I'm hungry.
Despite being a rookie to the wrestling scene, those with an eye for the business see Bam Bam's incredible potential, especially soon-to-be industry pioneer Paul Heyman.
Paul was doing wrestling magazines at the time. This before he was actually running around the business as a manager. And in his magazines, he was always promoting Bam Bam Bigelow like this phenomenon. And the guy never even had a match. Paul worked at Studio 54. He was doing publicity at the time. And he got this, gig, Bam Bam Bigelow's first match. And I looked at it and it was just like, oh my God. This guy's like 380 pounds and he's coming off the top rope. At that point, I'm going like, this guy's gonna be like it in wrestling. Like he's gonna be the biggest thing.
I was like 19 when we started dating, and I was with his brother and a couple other friends, and we went to his show, and he got up there and he wrestled, and they were just in awe of what it all was. I just was like, oh, he's at work. I didn't really know too much about it until the WWF came knocking.
At some point, I'm running another really big club in 86-ish, and I'm flicking the channels, and all of a sudden, I'm seeing wrestling, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Bigelow.
Take a good look, because we're bringing him from one end of the world to the other.
Next thing I know, he's with Hulk Hogan. He's in the WWF. And I'm like, oh my God.
From Asbury Park, New Jersey,
he made it.
Bam Bam Bigelow!
Not only is Bam Bam headed to the WWF, but he's coming in with the full support of company owner Vince McMahon.
WWF brought him in and, they tried to make him into the next big thing. They did the thing where all the managers were bidding on him to make him extra special.
I'm here to introduce Bam Bam Bigelow!
Vince loved big guys, and now you've got the most agile 380-pound guy that anyone has ever seen. I mean, they brought him in to be Hulk Hogan's tag team partner, to be right there with Hogan, and he was going to main event there, and he was going to work with the top guys.
In the beginning, Hulk Hogan was the one that really took me and said, okay, this is the business, this is how we do it, this is serious.
He signed the WWE contract, and we got married November 15th, 1987, and he went on the road November 16th, 1987.
How did he propose to you?
We were watching TV, and he was like,
want to get married?
And I was like, okay. And that was basically it. There was no fanfare. I saw him 10 times a year. I don't even know. Maybe that's why the marriage lasted so long. Maybe that's why I don't have anything bad to say. He was on the road and hit the ground running, and it was on from there.
Back in the early days with WWF, we were working 60 days in a row, a main event in front of a sold-out crowd every night, and on the weekends we'd do 2 shows. So it's life in the fast lane.
When he was home, he did regular things. So he remained very humble. Scott was who he was around here. But it was cool to see him on TV. He was in the first Nintendo game. Like I said, he was just breaking into the business, and he worked and he provided. He knew to take advantage of that situation and take advantage of everything that was given to him.
What a monster!
Everybody that gets a pair of boots and tights wants to be the world champion, right? And they think they're ready for it yesterday. For me, it was 11 years before I saw a world title. So when I did get that belt, I understood the responsibility that went with it. So I would think that Bam Bam being thrown that quickly into main events with, Hulk Hogan or one of these massive names, it would have been intimidating.
He never had to crawl his way up. There's always going to be jealousy, especially when you've been in the business 15 years and he's been in the business for 2 or 1, and he's on the top of the card.
He was young, and these guys were big, and it was George Animal Steel and King Kong Bundy, and it was just people that he always saw on TV, and all of a sudden he's standing in the middle of the ring in the Survivor Series, and the older guys were like, you know what, you need to step in line.
The 8th Wonder of...
I remember there was an Andre match. Of course, Andre the Giant was the biggest man you'll ever see. Andre got him in the ring up against the ropes and wrapped the rope around his neck. Scott was like, he's gonna kill me.
Andre tried to kill me in Madison Square Garden. He picked me up and he tried choking me out, and I was going, oh God, don't go out, don't go out. Yeah. Madison Square Garden main event sold out.
Yeah.
You can't pass out.
Look out, even Bam Bam looks small next to this guy.
Andre thought I was just a kid, thought I was getting too cocky or whatever. He was laying him in.
So, Andre, he was on top of him and he was pounding on him. Hard. It was a bad night at the office for Bam Bam Bigelow.
And Andre said something to him like, young boy, you're a little green for us. Like, this is how it works. Like, you're gonna learn. And Andre really just stuck it to him. But, they were just letting him know he had to pay his dues. He was green, and you need to wait your turn, because it's not right now.
After only a year in the big leagues, Bam Bam Bigelow's match with Andre the Giant marks his exit from the WWF.
He'd gotten such a big push, but at a certain point, they did sour on him.
Bam Bam Bigelow paid the price here.
And it may have been ego-wise, the other guys not liking him.
And my father just knowing when things getting a little too thick and it's not his time, he moved on.
Now on his own, Bam Bam travels the country working for various U.S. promotions before receiving a lucrative offer to wrestle in Japan.
I don't even know what years these are, but judging by the suit, probably early 90s. This is one of his original Japanese suits.
There was more money for him to be had overseas.
They offered me a lot of money to go work in Japan. I was working with Antonio Inoki. There was a lot of talent there.
When he went to Japan, he was on for 2 weeks and then home for 2 weeks. So he had longer stretches of time home.
What sparked his return to WWF?
A contract, and it was time for him to come back to the States. I guess in his meeting with Vince, they worked a deal that he felt comfortable and he was a little bit more mature and he was ready to come back.
All right, man. So what do you got here?
So this is his coming out to the ring attire when he was in his second run in the WWF. He would have pyrotechnics underneath here and they would shoot like fireworks out. I don't fill it out as much as he did. He said he used to look like a tulip in it.
In 1992, as the WWF struggles with declining popularity, Vince McMahon brings Bam Bam back to the roster. Once again proving to be a top-level star, Bam Bam gets thrust into the main event of WrestleMania 11.
WrestleMania 11.
When McMahon books him against one of the NFL's most celebrated players.
Lawrence Taylor, probably the most media-frenzied time of my father's career.
That was Scott's idol, like LT and the Giants. Like, now I'm gonna wrestle him, I'm gonna wrestle with him.
That build-up and that whole pomp and circumstance of being the main event in WrestleMania.
Lawrence Taylor, just me and you.
This was a match not for wrestling fans.
The media hype around this match has been absolutely huge.
This was a match for the general public. And the idea was by being in the match, all the exposure from the football press and the mainstream press would then make Bam Bam's name bigger, so then he could be the big star that they wanted him to be.
That means I'm here. I did it. I am the 1%. Every little boy wants to be a WWE wrestler, almost every little boy. And he was main event. It was a paycheck bigger than a lot of people make in 1 year.
I see a lot of videos online. People, it's the worst WrestleMania. You know what? There's not another person that could have carried Lawrence Taylor to do that show.
Business was down. Vince needed to hit a home run. And they picked me because I'm the only guy that could take chicken shit, turn it into chicken salad.
Vince trusted my father enough to be the person to pull that off.
Bam Bam soon learns that being the company's go-to big man comes with certain sacrifices.
The only problem working for Vince McMahon is that if you get hurt, there's no sympathy there. He wants you to work. It's really hard to do because your body can't take that type of punishment.
It definitely took a toll on his body.
I mean, every time he sits in a chair and stands up, he just squatted 400 pounds. A lot of wear and tear on your knees, your back, your neck, your shoulders.
I mean, the thing that made him so great was, an agile big guy. The problem with the agile big guys is that by doing that stuff, a smaller guy can take that stuff longer, and a big guy, it starts wearing down on you a lot.
He definitely had some knee surgeries and an elbow surgery or shoulder surgery. His body was starting to take a little bit of a licking. That's one thing I didn't do. I didn't worry and I didn't stress out. It was his job, and he was an entertainer and he was an athlete. And I was too young to think about the lifelong lasting effects of wrestling and what it would have on his body and his mind. But I do know that he knew if he was out and he was injured too long, somebody was going to step up and replace him. So that was a no-no.
I'm not letting the opportunity walk by me. That heavyweight championship is going to be mine.
He's got multiple injuries at this point. How's he dealing with that?
Probably pain pills like everybody else, but I do remember, that was so commonplace among wrestlers then.
It was such a part of the scene that it wasn't like a big deal. And it was hey, D, you got any Vikes? So you just gave them to your boy, because he needed them right there.
When you see this symbol, you can be assured of drug-free entertainment you can be proud of.
been tested for marijuana and performance-enhancing drugs, but you've got a prescription, you're good.
Through that 80s and then into the 90s, there were two things that coincided. If this is the wrestling industry, running right next to that is the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry is now coming up with better, more accessible opiates. OxyContin, which I did have a problem with.
I've seen it so much in my career. So many of my peers during that time just left us way too early because of addiction, especially pain pills.
He was diabetic and he had an endocrinologist, not a pain management doctor. And he would call and, I need perks, I need Vikes, I need Oxys. I need something to keep me going.
If you were at the pool party and old Doc came by, well, I happen to have a refillable script of OxyContins in return for autographs or, tickets to local shows here and there. It's a pretty powerful thing to have over someone.
They might as well have just put heroin in a bottle and called it OxyContin. I can guarantee you before that prescription was done, he was probably addicted.
In 1995, after a 3-year run with the WWF, Bam Bam Bigelow leaves the company to sign with the notorious hardcore wrestling promotion ECW, run by his old friend Paul Heyman.
I mean, the one reason he went to ECW was because he liked how it was local. Obviously, if he was in Asbury, the whole family would get together and we'd all go.
And he knew he had a commodity. He didn't take his character off. It was tattooed on his head. So wherever he went, Bam Bam Bigelow was going.
There is only one Bam Bam Bigelow.
I think it was a little too hardcore for me being so young.
Our fans were riding with us. That was the whole gimmick. We were renegades, well, damn it. We the fans, we're renegades too.
From fit to finish, those shows were chaos. Well, I remember this crowd just like a mosh pit. And this dude who is drunk as a skunk comes barreling and just absolutely face punches me, trucks me right into the ground. I'm like 10, 11 years old. Like, I've never been hit by a grown man. And it's that type of like, where you're like, you can't catch your breath. So I remember going backstage and I don't even think I told my father anything. He just like saw it and he's like, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know, this guy punched me, like went through the crowd. He's like, find him.
The gentleman who did that was escorted to the back for a conversation. I witnessed this quasi-conversation. I'll never forget it.
And all you hear is, so you want to hit kids? And you know that like, this dude is getting the life smacked out of him.
I don't know how else to put it. It was very bad. I'm sure everybody's okay now.
But the fans, in turn, are fueled by ECW's over-the-top, ultraviolet brand of extreme wrestling.
In ECW, we were a bunch of wrestlers that most of the bigger promotions, they didn't want us, kinda, and we were like the land of the misfit toys and incorporated a lot of new stuff into pro wrestling in a revolutionary way. I mean, you had to be tough to be in our company. And Bigelow was a very tough guy, legitimate guy. And he really started to come into his own amongst what we were doing.
The stuff that these guys were doing, jumping off the rafters, through tables, getting thrown into the stands, it's just as hardcore can get.
We weren't just trying to hurt each other. We were professionals. What happens in that ring is built on trust. So, the infamous Taz and Bigelow go through the ring in Asbury Park. So I get this phone call from Paul Heyman, and he says, you and Bigelow, he's gonna beat you for the belt, and he's gonna put you through the ring to do it. He goes, what do you think? And the first thing I thought is, I'm gonna die. So the way a ring is constructed, it's a steel frame, and then there's these thick wood boards, and then there's kind of like a cushion, it's not as big as a mat, and then a canvas. So these wood boards were cut first, so then the boards would just be moved out of the way, then open the trap door. And Bam Bam was concerned. What about Taz's head? Like, his head's gonna hit the frame of this thing. How are we gonna clear this hole? I almost feel dirty explaining this on air. I'm so old school, like, it's like unbelievable. So, basically, we fought. We were outside the ring for quite some time fighting until we get the signal that this door is open.
They've got both champion and challenger back in the ring.
So if you watch closely,
He's got it! He's got it locked up!
when I have the choke on, and I'm really pulling it back this curtain all the way here, right? So Bam Bam, he's tapping first, then he puts his hand on the top rope. Under his hand is a little piece of white tape. That white tape was the measurement to clear my head. We hit that crash mat hard as hell. The ring engulfs us, and we heard the people. My eyes lit up. I was so happy. And the first thing he says to me, "Are you okay?" That's Bam Bam Bigelow. And he goes, "We did it." And we were laughing because the place was rumbling. He waited for the people to come down a teeny bit, and then once they saw him come out first, we knew the pop would be loud, but I don't know if we knew it was gonna be that loud. I mean, it was just, I'll never forget it as long as I live. I got goosebumps.
I mean, there's so many things that could have gone wrong. You could break your back, you could break your neck, but Scotty never, ever said no to anything.
It's a small miracle that Bigelow is moving.
ECW was definitely extreme. I'm just surprised nobody died. I am really surprised nobody died.
You would see him come out, he'd have, giant gashes on his head, and he would just put some super glue on it, close it up, and then we would go have a cheesesteak.
I can't tell you how many times he's been sewed up in our living room. Doctor just would come over and just sew him up in the middle of the night while he was half asleep. So the injuries were the beginning of the end.
He had stenosis in the entirety of his spine. He had crushed discs. He had sections fused of his back at that time. You could run your finger down his spine and you could feel almost like braille. Pills just allowed him to move.
If you didn't go out and you didn't put on a show, you weren't getting paid. So I understand the aspect of having to take something to basically push you through that.
I did see Bigelow struggling a little bit physically, but he hit it well. He wouldn't tell you if you had to go over a match, "Hey dude, I'm hurting here, my shoulder hurts, my neck hurts, my back hurts." He was just, "Let's go, let's do it," whatever it was.
The pain pills Bam Bam Bigelow consumes allow him to continue performing at the highest level, but they also take a toll on his life away from the ring.
He was never, never, never aggressive, and he was always very respectful, and he became angry. He would at times be very coherent and at times be very incoherent, and he would be like, "You're just crazy and you're making things up. I'm under a doctor's care, and this is, what I have to do to be in the business." It was a doctor, an MD, who got paid a lot of money to treat him for one disease and gave him whole nother one.
The pill bottles from that doctor, I've never seen pill bottles that size in my life before. 100 pills, 300 pills.
This doctor was a fan, and he would have done anything that Scott wanted, regardless of his license, and he did. Scott was in denial, and so was the doctor, because I would call him and say, "Stop writing these prescriptions. You're destroying our lives. You're ruining our family."
And that doctor's response, he would call my father and say that the warden's calling me, telling me not to come over. Undermining my mother to my father in an already weakened state.
Nobody's paying attention to these doctors. You're a drug dealer, because he was not a pain doctor. It's a tragedy. Scott sold his soul for OxyContins. And he would have stepped over us in the street to get them.
Bam Bam Bigelow's addiction continues to get worse, fueled by an endless supply of OxyContin from his doctor.
OxyContin is one of America's new wonder drugs.
Since the drug came on the market, the number of annual prescriptions has risen to nearly 6 million.
Contributing to the problem are pill mills, where doctors write prescriptions for non-medical reasons.
He wasn't going to buy drugs off the street. He was home taking OxyContins. And then I got pregnant with Richie, and then the promises, this is going to be different. We're going to get through this. I think he tried to pull himself together because he said he always wanted a daughter his whole life. It was like beyond anything to have this daughter. And when she was little, he used to put her to bed every single night, and he would get a pillow and he would lay on the floor next to her and he would sing her songs and hold her hands. And he was in her room on her floor every night.
Wednesdays, Every Wednesday, my dad would pick me up from preschool, big red truck, eat all the Doritos you can imagine, paint pictures, just normal father-daughter relationship.
When he was around, he was focused on being with us and spending time with us.
What are you doing, boy? His body was a little hindered and he was starting to feel the pain, but you know, that didn't stop us from going to every opening day for fishing, every opening day for hunting. He got to be a dad, and without being on the road 300 plus days a year, those are the fondest memories. There's no pension in professional wrestling, so he needed to make as much money as he could with the body that he had because he knew it was deteriorating. He even says that he's the highest paid loser in the world because he'll take a loss as long as that loss pays.
I'm the guy who helped bring Bam Bam in to WCW. When he heard that I was wrestling, somehow he got my number. He's like, dude, you're doing it. Like, we grew up maybe 7 miles from each other. These two Jersey Shore boys, but now we're tag team champions. I'd never felt like he was under the influence in the ring, but eventually, people start to go back to their old habits, and that's why so many guys died. Overconsumption of pills. Because when you're taking 5 at a time, because 3 stopped working, you can't remember if you took them or not. So you take 5 more, and before you know it, you're that guy.
He went on the road and he would not show up to shows or tapings. He was in Arizona and friends of ours were there and he didn't make it to the show and they called home and I was like, what do you mean? He's there. It got to the point where he was a liability, and that's what they said. And they paid him the rest of his contract to stay home because he could not function.
I saw a man broken. He's away from his family and he's not in the best physical shape because he's in constant pain, having to take a pill just to get up. And not just a pill, multiple pills. But the trade-off of that is it completely dulls your senses. It completely just destroys your sense of person.
How many pills do you think he was taking a day?
15, 20 Oxycontins, easily.
A day?
Yeah.
It was dangerous. And a situation happened with the youngest where it became very dangerous.
I had wrote a paper about it when I was in 8th grade. And I went back and read it last night, understanding that what was happening is I'm writing about my father nodding out, driving. And when I wrote that in 8th grade, I had no idea that's what was going on. And I remember the officers were asking me all these questions, for a 3-year-old, they're asking me my address, my phone number, my mom's phone number, all this information. And I'm just like, I don't know, where's my dad? So when I went back last night and read it, really knowing what was going on, what was in his system, it just hits 10 times harder.
As Bam Bam Bigelow's addiction sends him crashing to rock bottom, he's charged with endangering the welfare of his daughter.
He was given an ultimatum. I'm like, you've either got to go get help or you have to go. He wouldn't get help. And he went. He didn't see that he had a problem the way that he did, the way that addicts do.
Dad's not going to be home anymore. They're getting a divorce. That's when he picked up and basically went to Florida.
He was married to a drug. So to watch a man who would choose that over his children, when I knew that was the most important thing, was just the worst thing ever.
I got to talk to him on the phone, but it would be like spans of where it would be really quiet because I could hear him crying. He was struggling to form the words, I
went down to Tampa, spring break, my senior year. I wanted to go down there to see my friends, but I really just wanted to go down there to find my dad. And his girlfriend answered the phone, said he wasn't available at the point in time. And then I got a phone call when I landed back in New Jersey from my father apologizing. And, I kind of aired him out a little bit. I told him how I felt. And then he died 3 weeks later.
I was in school teaching and a phone call got patched to my classroom and it was his brother, Todd. And Todd said, he's gone. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, he's gone. And he was crying hysterically. And I just hung up the phone and ran out of the building and Shane was in college.
Yeah, I got that call. I'll never forget. I'm walking back through the quad
there's kids going to class. And I got a phone call from my father's childhood friend. Your father died last night. And it's just like everybody around you is moving fast and you're just still. I just remember being numb.
It rocked me. What I heard. At that time, he was, going through a tough time.
I thought of his family instantly, because I know how much he loved his family and his wife. You know, I just felt for him.
He died of an overdose, accidental overdose, but you know, the word accidental and overdose should just not be in the same sentence. How do you accidentally, oops, took one too many? Took one too many for a long time.
On January 19th, 2007, at just 45 years of age, Bam Bam Bigelow dies by what authorities call an accidental overdose from a cocktail of illicit and prescription drugs.
I didn't grieve. There was none for me because I was scrambling. I had kids. They couldn't see me break down. They couldn't see me weak. And that's all I became, was a provider. Like, I didn't have time to coddle and nurture. That's the hardest part on me now.
Towards the end, it was very difficult with my mother, just because that was my dad, that was my hero.
My mom had to make a really tough decision. You know, for a while I never understood why we couldn't just go see Dad. And when you don't understand, you just think it's selfish. But then when you do, you become appreciative that you weren't exposed to something that would have been just so heartbreaking.
As a father, I think it digs into you that when you think, if there was no compunction for Bammer to reach out for some kind of help, that he must have thought that he had it under control. He must have figured this is not really a problem because of how much he talked about his kids.
It's been just honoring the legacy of Bam Bam.
Now collision course.
I never really got to stop and acknowledge my own pain.
You always think about, if you had one last chance, what you would say. I think there's more ask. It's just why.
His kids lost their dad at a young age. It's sad, you know, because Bigelow, like so many of us wrestlers during that time, was on the road a lot. You know, you're not around. You're making a living for your family.
If Scott was here, what would you say to him?
You mother. But through years of therapy, I know you had no control. It's not your fault. I don't blame you. You know, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be a drug addict today. You wake up every morning and you're like, today's going to be a change. Fine. But I would call him a mother first, just because he would expect that.
I can't fault him for what happened. You had to keep going. That's how you put the bread on the table.
I signed all the rights over to the kids, so they got all the royalty checks. So he, in his death, still supported them.
As far as being a big man, who's better than Bam Bam?
Nobody. There's nobody.
The best big man in the business. The guy that was doing cartwheels, moonsaults, drop kicks, and things that they never ever seen another big man do before. That's what I want to be remembered as.
When I think of pro wrestling, I think of power, I think of size, I think of my father.
World Heavyweight Champion, the Beast from the East, Bam Bam!
He was a great person, and how he lived and all the wonderful things that he did for people and the great father that he was should be what is remembered. Not how he died, because that's a terrible story, but he left such a legacy.
Bam Bam! Look at that maneuver!
He was that 1%.
Fans, the terrifying reality of his surroundings set in. It was dark, it was precarious, and it was deeply unsettling. The Undertaker followed, and as the two massive men stood upon the roof, a new, unscripted terror emerged. The top section of the cage had been secured with industrial zip ties, but the structure was never designed to support 600 pounds of battling humanity. With every step the combatants took, the mesh groaned and sagged by nearly a foot. The sickening sound of plastic zip ties snapping under the immense pressure echoed through the arena. The combatants were literally destroying the cell just by standing on it. Foley attempted a suplex on the roof, but The Undertaker astutely blocked it. Realizing that such a high-impact move could send them both crashing through the unstable ceiling prematurely, the brawl gravitated toward the edge of the perilous structure. From a distance, observers like Jim Cornette believed it was merely a tease, assuming there was absolutely no margin for error to safely execute a fall from that altitude. Foley peered down at the Spanish announcer's desk, which from 20 feet in the air looked as fragile as dollhouse furniture. The margin between a spectacular stunt and a fatal tragedy was microscopic. And then the unthinkable happened. The Undertaker seized Mankind, hoisted him into the air, and hurled a 300-pound human being off the roof of the cage. Time seemed to fracture. For those watching, the terrifying descent felt as though it were happening in slow motion. Yet it concluded in the violent blink of an eye. The sickening crash of human flesh obliterating the wooden table resonated like a bomb detonating. The arena erupted in a chaotic chorus of screams and pure disbelief. Backstage, the locker room exploded in sheer panic. Fellow professionals, men who made their living simulating violence, believed they had just witnessed a fatality. It was akin to watching a horrific automobile accident unfold in real time. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely managed to dive out of the way before the impact. He was left traumatized, staring at his friend's broken body, paralyzed by the unwritten rule of the industry that one must never interfere with the performance. Terry Funk was the first to break character and sprint to the wreckage, frantically checking if Foley was still conscious. In the backstage medical area, Dr. Francois Petit, the company's martial arts trained, bone-adjusting physician, heard the frantic calls over the radio. A man had fallen from the top of the cell. Paramedics rushed to the scene. The atmosphere was completely devoid of theatricality. This was a genuine medical emergency. Due to the massive steel cell blocking the aisle, the emergency medical technicians struggled to maneuver the gurney. The entire structure had to be mechanically raised, with the Undertaker still perched menacingly on the roof, just to transport the fallen gladiator. Foley was strapped to the board, surrounded by genuine concern. Families watching at home, including Foley's own young children, were horrified. Colette Foley found herself desperately lying to her children, assuring them that it was all fake to soothe their tears, while in her own mind, panic consumed her. Yet, as the gurney rolled up the ramp, something inexplicable occurred in the mind of Mick Foley. Despite the agonizing pain, the adrenaline began to mask the trauma. He realized that the longer he prolonged the drama, the more deeply the audience became invested. Against the frantic pleas of the medical staff, the officials, and the executives backstage screaming for him to stop, Foley tore himself free from the gurney. With a dislocated shoulder and a battered body, he inexplicably turned around and began to climb the cell for a second time. The crowd's shock morphed into absolute awe. It was an act of pure, irrational defiance. Backstage, producers braced themselves. Foley had miraculously survived the planned stunt, but as he reached the roof again, the situation shifted from dangerous theater to a genuine catastrophe. The next sequence of events was supposed to be relatively safe compared to the initial fall. The plan called for The Undertaker to deliver a choke slam onto the mesh, causing the cage roof to sag dramatically, allowing the camera to capture a menacing visual of The Undertaker looming over a trapped Mankind. That was the scripted narrative, but physics and structural failure had a different plan. When The Undertaker drove Foley into the steel, the battered zip ties completely gave way. The roof tore open. Foley did not sag into the mesh. He plummeted violently through the gaping hole, dropping straight down to the unyielding ring canvas. The ring mat is not a soft cushion. Falling onto it from that height is akin to hitting solid cement. But the fall itself was only half the tragedy. As Foley dropped, a heavy, solid steel folding chair that had been resting on the roof fell precisely behind him. When Foley's face smashed into the canvas, the steel chair came crashing down directly onto his head. The reaction was vastly different from the first fall. There was no theatrical gasp. There was only a horrifying, dead silence. Foley lay motionless. Gerald Briscoe desperately tried to contact someone, anyone, to stop the match, but communications were jammed in the chaos. Backstage, the sentiment was unanimous. The impact was lethal. This was not a calculated risk, it was a brutal, unscripted accident that could have easily claimed his life. Foley's family, watching in horror, felt utterly betrayed, believing he had hidden this second, seemingly suicidal stunt from them. For the first time in his career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Medical personnel, officials, and Terry Funk flooded the ring. The Undertaker stared down through the torn roof, looking at Dr. Francois and gesturing that enough was enough, recognizing that Foley's eyes were completely vacant. The Undertaker instructed Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. Funk confirmed he was alive, but barely. Foley lay in darkness for 42 terrifying seconds. In a desperate bid to buy the medical team time, Terry Funk, operating entirely on instinct, provoked The Undertaker into attacking him, drawing the camera's focus away from the lifeless body of his friend. Under any normal sporting protocol, the match would have been immediately terminated. But professional wrestling in the late 90s operated under a different code. They did not stop matches, they bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing his blurred vision registered was the shoes of Terry Funk, in a testament to his unfathomable conditioning and psychological drive. Foley's immediate instinct was to continue the performance. He staggered to his feet, a horrifying visual of human endurance. As the fog in his brain began to lift slightly, Foley's mind reverted to his ultimate goal, creating an unforgettable television image. He possessed a massive, gaping wound beneath his lower lip. In a moment of grotesque brilliance, he deliberately pushed his tongue through the open hole in his face, smiling a bloody, horrific smile for the cameras. Adding to the macabre scene, a jagged tooth was clearly visible lodged entirely inside his nasal cavity. Medical officials later hypothesized that the impact of the chair had knocked the tooth down his throat, and in his desperate, heavy gasping for air, he had inhaled it back up into his nasal passage. The pain was excruciatingly real. The expressions of terror on the faces of the officials were genuine. Foley's eyes betrayed a severe concussion. Nobody was home behind his gaze. Yet he demanded to continue. He instructed the referee to bring out the thumbtacks. In a final, agonizing sequence, Foley was slammed violently into a massive pile of steel tacks, purposely rolling his battered body over them to ensure they embedded deep into his flesh. The adrenaline had completely overridden his nervous system. He was no longer just experiencing pain, he had become the pain. After 17 agonizing minutes, the spectacle finally concluded with The Undertaker securing the victory. As the bell rang, a stretcher was brought to the ring, but true to his legendary persona, Foley waved it off. He walked out on his own 2 feet, bathed in the adoration of 16,000 fans who had just witnessed a man sacrifice his physical well-being for their entertainment. The crowd's belief in him was absolute. He had proven that he could not be stopped, and that level of authentic suffering cemented a bond with the audience that could never be broken. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of immense relief and profound trauma. Colette Foley, waiting desperately for the customary post-match phone call that always reassured her of his safety, was left in an agonizing limbo. When he finally called hours later, her fear had transformed into furious anger, screaming that their children believed they had watched their father die on television. The trust she had that he would not jeopardize their family was deeply fractured. Behind the curtain, Vince McMahon was one of the first to greet the broken gladiator. As doctors meticulously plucked thumbtacks from Foley's flesh, a procedure Foley was so concussed he didn't even realize was happening, McMahon offered a solemn message. He thanked Foley for his extraordinary sacrifice for the company, but firmly demanded a promise that Foley would never attempt anything of that magnitude ever again. Fellow wrestlers approached with genuine fear, checking to see if he was truly alive. The toll on his body was catastrophic: a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that would plague him for 6 weeks, missing teeth, and 15 facial stitches. Yet, in the twisted logic of professional wrestling, the carnage paid off. That single match sparked a massive career renaissance. It completely shattered the preconceived notions held by management. From being a performer Vince McMahon did not even want to look at, Foley transformed into the World Wrestling Federation champion just 6 months later. However, the pursuit of the roar of the crowd is an insatiable addiction. The bar for violence had been set impossibly high, and Foley felt an overwhelming obligation to his opponents and his fans to continually over-deliver. Despite McMahon's warnings that this chaotic style would inevitably catch up with him, Foley could not stop. He was riding a massive wave of momentum, just 7 months after Hell in a Cell. The consequences of this relentless escalation culminated in another deeply controversial spectacle: the I Quit match against The Rock. The parameters of the match dictated that there would be no stoppages for excessive blood loss. Against the desperate advice of his peers, Foley insisted on pushing the boundaries once more. The bout devolved into sheer brutality. Foley, handcuffed and defenseless, had instructed The Rock to hit him with everything he had. The original plan called for 5 chair shots to the head. Instead, in the heat of the unscripted chaos, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected, devastating blows with a steel chair. For his family, the I Quit match was a waking nightmare. His children, particularly his daughter Noelle, were too young to fully separate the fictional storyline from the terrifying reality of their father being brutalized. The trauma was so severe that Noelle later admitted she had completely blocked out any memory of her father's wrestling career. The physical reality of those 11 chair shots was sickening. According to medical perspectives, a normal human being could have easily succumbed to fatal brain injuries from such an onslaught. Foley was trading pieces of his neurological future for a wrestling angle on television. The medical community eventually intervened. Independent neurologists explicitly warned Foley that he needed to stop, stating unequivocally that continuing to wrestle would leave him permanently crippled. But the addiction to the roar of the crowd is a powerful force. Foley continuously tried to delay the inevitable, stepping into the ring even when he was suffering from compounding concussions. The trauma accumulated. There were terrifying instances where Foley would be driving and suddenly have no memory of where he lived. Every major impact in the ring was the equivalent of a 25-mile-per-hour car crash, and Foley had endured thousands of them. Today, the brutal legacy of those decisions casts a long, heavy shadow. The industry now possesses a much deeper understanding of the long-term, devastating effects of repetitive brain trauma, specifically chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The grim reality is that Foley is paying a severe physical and neurological price for the fame and the legendary status he achieved. His family lives with the constant, terrifying anxiety of what the future holds for his cognitive health in the next 10 to 20 years. To combat the terrifying decline, Foley fights back the only way he knows how: by performing. He engages in spoken word shows, utilizing the stage as a form of mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp, desperately clinging to the stimulation and the adoration of the audience to keep the darkness at bay. The legacy of Hell in a Cell is profoundly complex. For years, Foley harbored a deep resentment toward the match. He fell into a dark psychological space, feeling that despite a long and storied career, his entire existence had been reduced to a single night of barbaric suffering. He felt as though he had accomplished nothing else of value. It took a conversation with The Undertaker to shift his perspective. The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night was immortal. It would long outlive them both. Foley eventually embraced the reality that creating awe-inspiring, unforgettable moments was the exact reason he entered the grueling profession in the first place. The emotional weight of that night is undeniable. Years later, while exploring a company warehouse with his daughter, Foley unexpectedly stumbled upon the original cell structure. According to his daughter, upon touching the rusted steel, the hardcore legend broke down in tears. It was a profound release of emotion from a man realizing the sheer magnitude of the terrifying risk he had taken, and the miraculous fact that he had survived it. Was the sacrifice worth the adulation? It is a question that lingers over the entire industry. Foley admits that there is no financial or egotistical reward substantial enough to truly justify the catastrophic risks he took. While he acknowledges that the medical ignorance of the era played a role, he cannot say with absolute certainty that he would have altered his path, even if he had known the horrific consequences. The wrestling ring was a canvas, and Foley viewed his unparalleled tolerance for pain as a tool to create sublime, albeit horrifying, performance art. The story of Mick Foley and the Hell in a Cell is not merely a tale of athletic endurance. It is a profound, deeply unsettling psychological study of a man who traded his physical and mental well-being for the intoxicating roar of strangers. It stands as an epic success of television spectacle and a haunting, cautionary tale of the devastating collateral damage left in the wake of professional wrestling's darkest, most violently compelling illusions. The world of professional wrestling is a theater of the absurd, a gladiatorial spectacle where the lines between scripted entertainment and harsh, unyielding reality are continuously blurred. Yet, even in an industry built on suspending disbelief, there are singular moments that shatter the illusion entirely, moments that hit you like a heavy mallet to the consciousness. As someone who has spent a lifetime calling the action from ringside, analyzing the triumphs and tragedies of this grueling sport, I can tell you that nothing prepares you for the absolute chaos of the squared circle when the safety nets are removed. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view, one match earned its place as arguably the most shocking, terrifying, and legendary encounter in the history of the business. The combatants were The Undertaker and Mankind. The battleground was a towering steel structure known as Hell in a Cell. Going into that broadcast, industry insiders knew it was going to be a wild night. The two athletes standing in the ring were performers who thrived on pushing the absolute limits of physical storytelling. Men who loved to inch toward the envelope until it tumbled violently over the edge. People sitting at home often loudly proclaim that professional wrestling is fake. But as any veteran of the ring will attest, you cannot fake gravity. Over the decades, I have seen things that frightened me, things that made my blood run cold. But nothing terrified me as much as the events that unfolded on that fateful summer evening in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What left a sold-out arena of 16,000 fans completely stunned, and what continues to captivate audiences today, was the unrelenting, horrifying punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the leather Mankind mask, willingly endured. Until you watched it happen before your very eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically absorb such trauma and survive. The match we witnessed was real. The visceral pain was real. The unscripted drama was real. Sitting at the commentary desk, seasoned professionals were cursing, screaming, and legitimately questioning the sanity of the man putting his life on the line. When you witness a human being self-destruct for the sake of entertainment, the lingering question always remains, why are you doing this? To understand the infamous legacy of Hell in a Cell, a match that stands as both a towering epic success and a grim cautionary tale, we must delve deep into the complex psychology of Mick Foley. Every individual who steps between those ropes is searching for something that they find profoundly missing in their everyday lives. For Foley, the drive stemmed from a deeply rooted desire for acceptance. Growing up, he faced relentless teasing, which fostered an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked by those around him. He dreamed of holding the world championship belt, of standing atop the mountain, Foley possessed a unique understanding of crowd manipulation from a remarkably young age. According to Foley himself, during his sophomore year in college, he gathered his dorm mates for an impromptu stunt. He took a swig of red food coloring, ascended a piece of furniture, and executed a flying leap onto a stuffed atom resting on a hard concrete floor. Upon impact, he dramatically spat the red concoction from his mouth. When a female onlooker cried out in absolute disgust, Foley did not feel shame. Instead, he felt an intoxicating rush of power. He realized a fundamental truth about himself and the audience. If he could not make people unconditionally love him, perhaps he could captivate them by utterly disgusting them. He needed reactions, and he was willing to sacrifice his own body to harvest them. This relentless pursuit of a crowd reaction birthed the hardcore legend. Yet beneath the scars and the missing teeth, there was a fiercely loyal family man. Colette Foley, who has stood by Mick for over 35 years, remembers first meeting a gentle, kind soul with terrible, corny humor. Their bond was deep, famously dancing to Beauty and the Beast at their wedding. She understood his unwavering commitment to his craft. However, she also understood that when the adrenaline flooded his veins, her husband wanted nothing more than to leave the audience breathless, even if it meant placing himself at catastrophic risk. His daughter, Noelle Foley, echoes this sentiment, noting that her father simply loved eliciting shock and awe from a crowd, chasing that elusive roar of disbelief. Realism became Foley's weapon of choice. He genuinely believed that he was not delivering a quality performance unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room at the end of the night. It was not that he enjoyed the agonizing physical pain, but rather he reveled in his ability to endure it and project it into a compelling narrative. He developed an erratic persona named Cactus Jack, a character so wild and unhinged that audiences legitimately questioned his sanity. He possessed an undeniable, magnetic charisma. Veterans of the wrestling industry recognize this unique psychological brilliance. Renowned producer and manager Jim Cornette noted that Foley possessed an uncanny mastery of match psychology. Foley understood that fans were intensely drawn to performers who appeared completely out of control, athletes who seemed to be defying the scripted boundaries of the show. By taking the audience on a perilous, unpredictable ride, Foley ensured that the spotlight remained firmly fixed upon him, allowing his reputation to grow exponentially across the globe. Foley's early career was forged in the brutal fires of the Japanese wrestling circuits. Living in sparse conditions, sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a room equipped with only a small black and white television and a struggling videocassette recorder, Foley would consume up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling footage a day. He was captivated by the stark realism and the intricate storytelling of the grueling physical environment. He realized that a great match was not simply man against man, but man against his surroundings. He eventually traveled to Japan, where the promoters were searching for a foreign athlete reckless enough to engage in a bitter rivalry with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk was renowned as an absolute master at making audiences suspend their disbelief, and he quickly became a vital mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in unimaginably violent, fiery death matches. Foley found himself consistently drawn to the most dangerous elements, crawling through barbed wire and broken glass, viewing his shredded skin as undeniable proof that he had created something truly special. Because of this brutal pedigree, Foley never initially envisioned himself as a cornerstone of the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company was heavily marketing a family-friendly, general audience product. It was a highly sanitized era, and Foley's brand of visceral violence did not seem to fit the corporate mold. Former wrestling superstar Al Snow, who traveled the endless highways with Foley and considered himself his closest confidant, noted that company chairman Mr. Vince McMahon flatly rejected the idea of hiring Foley. McMahon did not find Foley marketable or aesthetically appealing. It took the relentless advocacy of talent relations executive Jim Ross to change McMahon's mind. Ross recognized that the company desperately needed compelling antagonists for their premier attraction, The Undertaker. McMahon was endlessly booking giant, plotting opponents, which resulted in dull, uninspired television. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a fearless, unpredictable lunatic. McMahon finally relented, slamming his hand on a table, but under one strict, insulting condition. He demanded that Foley's face be completely covered so the audience would not know who he was. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody, a blank slate. Thus, the masked, deranged character of Mankind was conceived. Hall of Fame producer Jerry Briscoe marvels at the fact that they were tasked with building a captivating persona out of corporate thin air. Briscoe famously noted that Foley was so fearless he would not turn anything down but his bed covers. This bizarre experiment would have failed miserably with any other performer. But Foley's profound emotional connection with the audience breathed life into the madness. Fans can inherently sense genuine commitment, and Foley was willing to sacrifice everything to make the audience believe. Foley and The Undertaker proceeded to build an incredible foundation, battling across the world in 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches. However, as the summer of 1998 approached, Foley felt his character had reached a creative plateau. He felt a desperate need to execute something extraordinary, something that would permanently cement their legacy rather than detract from it. The stage was set for the King of the Ring event. Producers decided to utilize the newly developed Hell in a Cell structure to escalate the rivalry. The previous year, Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker had competed in the inaugural Hell in a Cell match, setting a phenomenally high standard. Traditional cage matches in the World Wrestling Federation ended when a competitor escaped over the top or through a door. Hell in a Cell was intensely claustrophobic, featuring a heavy chain-link roof. 2 men enter, and only one walks out. Foley watched the groundbreaking Michaels match in utter awe, knowing he possessed none of the athletic grace of Shawn Michaels. Seeking advice, he consulted his mentor Terry Funk. Funk jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cage and get thrown off. What began as a dark joke instantly crystallized in Foley's mind into a terrifying reality. He looked at Funk and calmly stated that he could actually survive a fall like that. Foley pitched the death-defying stunt to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon, casually dropping the idea into conversation. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant, deeply uncomfortable with the sheer danger of hurling a man off a towering steel structure. But Foley was dead set on the idea, eventually convincing everyone involved. Foley did not view this match as the beginning of a grand second act in his career. He saw it merely as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water, fully believing that once his current run concluded, his career would be over. When the night of June 28th arrived, the tension inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was palpable. As Foley made his long walk to the ring, the immense pressure was resting squarely on his shoulders. Backstage, producers and ring crew members, including Jimmy Corderas and Jerry Briscoe, sat glued to the television monitors. Briscoe, operating as the lead producer, described sitting in the captain's seat, completely unaware of the horrifying depths the match would eventually reach. Commentators Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were kept entirely in the dark, experiencing the unfolding shock exactly like the millions of fans watching at home. When the menacing music played, Foley bypassed the heavy steel door and began climbing the exterior wall of the cage. The audience was bewildered. The Undertaker followed him up. Foley had confidently assured management that he was comfortable on the roof, but in reality, he suffered from a fear of heights and was absolutely terrified as he stared down at the concrete floor far below. The tension escalated rapidly. The cell roof had been secured with industrial zip ties, never designed to support the combined 600 pounds of 2 massive athletes. With every step they took, the steel mesh sagged dangerously, dropping nearly a foot. The terrifying sound of heavy zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. The structure was literally breaking apart under their feet. Foley attempted a maneuver to throw The Undertaker onto the sagging mesh, but The Undertaker wisely reversed it, knowing the roof was on the verge of total collapse. As the combatants brawled toward the edge of the towering structure, the sense of impending doom was suffocating. From the commentary desk, Jim Ross felt a creeping realization that a catastrophic event was imminent. Then it happened. In a visual that remains permanently etched into the cultural consciousness, a 300-pound man was violently hurled from a height of 20 feet, plummeting frantically through the air, completely at the mercy of gravity. To those watching, time simultaneously froze and accelerated. The sickening sound of human bone and flesh crashing through the Spanish announcer's table echoed. Like a shotgun blast, the entire arena collectively gasped. Backstage, seasoned professionals exploded in pure panic, feeling as though they had just witnessed a fatal automobile collision. Spanish commentator Hugo Savinovic scrambled for his life to avoid being crushed. The sheer violence of the impact was so unprecedented that many legitimately believed Mick Foley was dead. For the family watching at home, the nightmare was fully realized. Colette Foley tried desperately to soothe her two young children, repeatedly telling them it was just acting, while internally suffering a total emotional breakdown. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. If The Undertaker had thrown Foley a fraction of an inch too far or too short, Foley would have crashed directly onto solid concrete or into the front row of spectators. Incredibly, Foley had maintained a sliver of spatial awareness during his descent. He managed to rotate his body in midair, ensuring he landed flat on the wooden desk, which ultimately cushioned the blow just enough to save his life. The ringside area instantly transformed into a chaotic medical trauma scene. Terry Funk rushed from the backstage area. The company medical official, Dr. Francois Petit, a highly skilled physical specialist, sprinted to the wreckage. Foley lay motionless. Emergency medical technicians rushed a stretcher to the debris field, struggling to navigate the heavy steel of the cage. Foley was strapped to the board. The match, by all logical metrics, was over. But logic has no place in Hell in a Cell. As the stretcher rolled up the aisle, a bruised, battered, and highly concussed Mick Foley realized that his vulnerability was intensely captivating the audience. Against the frantic pleading of medical staff and company officials, Foley dragged himself off the gurney. With a terrifying, singular focus, he marched back to the cage and began to climb again. The crowd erupted into a state of absolute delirium. The Undertaker met him on the roof once more. Foley had mapped out a second major stunt, planning to take a massive chokeslam maneuver. The intention was for the impact to gently give way to the already broken zip ties, allowing Foley to be safely lowered into the ring. But the fractured steel had entirely lost its structural integrity. When The Undertaker drove Foley into the roof, the heavy mesh panel completely detached. Foley plummeted completely untethered, crashing violently onto the solid, unforgiving ring canvas below. To compound the catastrophic error, a heavy steel folding chair that had been resting on the roof followed Foley through the gaping hole, striking him viciously directly in the face upon impact. This second fall was vastly more dangerous than the first. The ring canvas is essentially a thin mat stretched tight over heavy wooden boards and steel beams. Hitting it from that height is akin to crashing on a solid cement. For the first time in his legendary career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked completely unconscious. Backstage, the panic evolved into sheer terror. Colette Foley was screaming at the television set, infuriated that her husband had deceived her about the second stunt. In the ring, Dr. Petit, Terry Funk, and company officials flooded through the cage door. The Undertaker stared down from the roof, his eyes wide with genuine fear, asking Funk to verify if Foley was even breathing. 42 agonizing seconds vanished completely from Foley's memory. Sensing the need to maintain control of the live broadcast, Terry Funk boldly provoked The Undertaker into a physical altercation, drawing the camera's attention away so the medical personnel could desperately evaluate the motionless Foley. By any modern standard of sports medicine, the match should have been immediately terminated. But in that era of professional wrestling, officials rarely stopped about. They simply bought time for the athletes to recover. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was the shoes of Terry Funk. The fog slowly began to clear, and his instinctual dedication to television production overrode his survival instincts. He possessed a massive, gaping laceration completely piercing the area beneath his lower lip. In a moment of grotesque brilliance, Foley purposefully thrust his tongue through the bloody hole, smiling morbidly for the camera. Furthermore, a dislodged tooth had somehow been violently knocked upward, resting visibly inside his nostril. Medical professionals later surmised that Foley had actually swallowed the tooth and forcibly exhaled it into his nasal cavity while gasping for air. Refusing to surrender, Foley ordered the officials out of the ring. He then introduced thousands of razor-sharp steel thumbtacks onto the canvas, purposely dragging his own battered body through the metal spikes to ensure maximum visual carnage. The physical pain had transcended normal human comprehension. Foley was operating entirely on adrenaline, pushing his body so far beyond the brink of exhaustion that the pain simply became part of his existence. After 17 agonizing minutes, The Undertaker finally secured the victory. The immediate aftermath was a sobering reality check. When Foley finally retreated behind the curtain, he was swarmed by deeply concerned colleagues. Mr. McMahon approached him directly, expressing profound gratitude for what Foley had sacrificed for the company, but strictly demanding that Foley promise never to do anything so reckless again. While the company doctor relentlessly plucked thumbtacks from his back, a deeply concussed Foley calmly asked The Undertaker if they had remembered to utilize the thumbtacks in the match, entirely unaware of his own shredded flesh. When Foley finally contacted his frantic wife hours later, she lashed out in terrified anger, screaming that their children genuinely believed their father had died on live television. Foley suffered immense physical trauma. He required 15 heavy stitches beneath his lip. He lost 2 front teeth. He suffered a severely dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, and an undocumented, massive concussion. Yet for Foley, the validation seemed worth the monumental sacrifice. That single match sparked an incredible career renaissance. The man Vince McMahon initially deemed unmarketable transformed into the world champion a mere 6 months later. But the addiction to the roar of the crowd is a dangerous affliction. The bar had been set impossibly high, and Foley felt a crushing obligation to continuously over-deliver, desperately trying to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. This toxic cycle culminated a mere 7 months later in a brutally violent I Quit match against The Rock. Despite warnings from industry veterans that his reckless style would inevitably catch up to him, Foley orchestrated a sequence where he was handcuffed and subjected to a barrage of unprotected strikes to the head with a solid steel chair. Foley instructed his opponent not to hold back. Instead of the planned 5 strikes, Foley absorbed 11 horrifying blows to the skull. The collateral damage was immense. His young children sat in the front row, crying uncontrollably as their father was brutalized. While the storyline was purely fiction, the severe brain damage inflicted upon Mick Foley was absolute medical fact. Following this terrifying exhibition, independent neurologists delivered a devastating verdict, explicitly warning Foley that his continued participation in professional wrestling would ultimately leave him permanently crippled. Today, the long-term shadow of repetitive brain trauma and chronic traumatic encephalopathy looms heavily over the Foley family. Foley openly admits to suffering severe memory lapses, occasionally struggling to remember his own address. His daughter, Noelle, lives with the constant, agonizing fear of what her father's cognitive health will look like in 10 or 20 years. Foley pays a daily, unrelenting physical price for his global fame. For many years, Foley harbored deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match, frustrated that his entire lifetime of dedicated storytelling was entirely overshadowed by two terrifying stunts. He fell into a dark emotional place, feeling as though he had accomplished nothing of true substance. But time grants perspective. During a deeply emotional conversation, The Undertaker reminded Foley that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. During a recent visit to a company storage warehouse, Foley and his daughter unexpectedly stumbled upon the original cell structure. The sheer gravity of what he had survived washed over him, bringing the legendary tough guy to tears. It was a stark, sobering realization of his own mortality. He acknowledged that there is truly no financial or professional reward substantial enough to justify risking one's life. Yet, when asked if he would alter his past, Foley remains beautifully complex. He views the wrestling ring as a grand canvas where he was allowed to create surreal, sublime performance art. He subjected his body to unimaginable torment to earn the acceptance of total strangers. He desired to be authentic, and above all, he desired to be deeply loved. Through his immense sacrifice, Mick Foley achieved immortality, gifting the world a dangerously crazy masterpiece that continues to leave audiences in absolute awe. The world of professional wrestling is built on an illusion. It is a carefully orchestrated dance of predetermined outcomes, larger-than-life characters, and scripted drama. But every so often, the script is torn to shreds. The illusion shatters, and the audience is left face to face with terrifying, unfiltered reality. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view event, the world witnessed one of the most shocking and visceral spectacles in the history of sports entertainment. It was a match that would forever alter the landscape of the industry, redefine the limits of human endurance, and cement the legacy of a man willing to sacrifice his own life for the roar of the crowd. This was The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell is not just a structure. It is a monument to brutality. It hits the consciousness like a mallet. According to the accounts of those present that night, there was an underlying tension, a collective knowledge that this match was going to be chaotic. But absolutely no one could have predicted the depths of madness it would reach. Inside that ring were two talents who thrived on pushing the envelope. Two men who walked the razor-thin line between entertainment and genuine peril until they completely fell over the edge. People often say that professional wrestling is fake. But as the events of that night proved, you cannot fake gravity. For those of us who have spent decades analyzing the squared circle, we have seen our fair share of frightening moments. Yet, according to the testimonies of the veterans backstage, nothing frightened them as much as the events that unfolded in Pittsburgh, at least until the match progressed and the horror truly escalated. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, almost inhuman punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, willingly endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically subject their body to such devastation and survive. There was no smoke and mirrors here. The match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. Behind the curtain, seasoned professionals were cursing, screaming, and calling him an absolute idiot. Why are you doing this? What possesses a man to gamble his life on live television? As one of wrestling's most infamous encounters, the legacy of Hell in a Cell persists as a complex paradox. It is simultaneously an epic, unparalleled success and a grim cautionary tale. Looking back, many analysts agree that the industry dodged multiple bullets that night. It is profoundly disturbing to realize that the environment allowed a performer to be rendered completely unconscious, only for the match to continue as if nothing had happened. But to understand the match, you must understand the man. You must dive into the psychological collateral damage that ensues when the line between the character and the human being blurs. When does the pursuit of greatness stop? When is the sacrifice considered enough? The tragic reality of the wrestling business is that you pay every single day for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but everyone involved, and everyone who cheers from the stands, must ask themselves the ultimate question: was it truly worth it? Every individual who steps into a wrestling ring is searching for something. They're looking to fill a void that exists in their own personal lives. For Mick Foley, the origin of his unimaginable pain tolerance was rooted in deep psychological vulnerability. Growing up, he was subjected to relentless teasing. This isolation fostered an overwhelming, desperate need to be liked, a need so powerful that it eventually drove him to pursue the World Wrestling Federation Championship. According to Foley's own recollections, the genesis of his willingness to endure suffering for a reaction began long before he ever laced up a pair of boots. As a college sophomore, he orchestrated a bizarre stunt. He took a swig of red food coloring, climbed onto a bed, and launched himself in a diving leap onto a stuffed animal resting on a solid concrete floor. Upon impact, he violently spat out the red concoction. The dormitory was packed with onlookers. Amidst the shock, a female student yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that precise moment, Foley did not feel shame. He felt absolute power. He realized a fundamental truth that would dictate the rest of his life. If he could not force people to love him, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He needed reactions. He needed the world to look at him and feel something, anything. He became Mick Foley, the hardcore legend, the man who would eventually survive Hell in a Cell. Today, Hell in a Cell serves as a strange gateway for new viewers. Many die-hard fans point to this specific match as their introduction to the industry. However, it creates an impossible standard. New viewers often ask if they should expect every match to look like that, not realizing that what happened that night was an anomaly, a terrifying deviation from the norm. A standard Mick Foley match was already a gruesome affair. It was characterized by a hardcore, brutal style. It frequently involved copious amounts of blood, scattered thumbtacks, and even fire. Throughout his career, Foley pushed his body through unspeakable horrors. According to historical records, his time competing in Japan saw him entangled in barbed wire, caught in explosions fueled by composition for explosives, speared through flaming tables, and taking devastating falls directly onto exposed concrete. He put his physical form through more trauma than the human frame was ever designed to withstand. To those closest to him, this was simply who he was. His daughter, Noelle Foley, noted that her father genuinely thrived on eliciting extreme reactions from the crowd, feeding on their shock and disgust. Realism was his greatest weapon. Foley himself admitted that he did not believe he had delivered a good performance unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room. It was not that he enjoyed the pain itself, but rather, he found immense joy in his ability to absorb it and project a narrative that captivated the masses. He forced observers to question their own eyes, making them wonder if he had truly lost his mind. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, faced a monumental challenge in accepting this lifestyle. When she first met him, she saw past the scars and the madness. She noticed his gentle eyes, his inherent kindness, and fell in love with his terrible sense of humor and corny jokes. Their connection was profound, underscored by the fact that their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast, a fitting metaphor for the gentle soul trapped within a battered, violent exterior. They operated as a team. She understood his unyielding commitment to the craft. When the adrenaline surged through his veins, his singular focus was ensuring the audience left the arena talking about how incredible the show was, regardless of the personal risk he incurred. This dangerous drive propelled him to constantly escalate the violence, seeking greater heights and deeper extremes along the way. This unquenchable thirst for reaction gave birth to the persona of Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was unpredictable, a wild entity that made audiences legitimately question his sanity. He possessed a strange, magnetic charisma. You simply could not look away. He was entirely different from the polished athletes of the era. Jim Cornette, a legendary agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation during the time of Hell in a Cell, recognized Foley's brilliant grasp of ring psychology. Foley understood that the audience craved chaos. They wanted to see someone who appeared completely out of control, someone who seemed to abandon the script and operate on pure, feral instinct. He knew exactly how to take the crowd on an emotional roller coaster, manipulating their reactions perfectly. By stepping out of line and acting like a madman, he commanded the spotlight, and his dangerous reputation grew exponentially. This mastery of violence was not accidental. It was the result of obsessive study. Early in his career, Foley's living conditions were incredibly humble. His bedroom furniture consisted merely of a mattress placed directly on the floor, accompanied by a small black and white television and a barely functioning videocassette recorder. Inside that machine were tapes of Japanese professional wrestling. Foley would sometimes sit in that room, absorbing up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling programming a day. He was utterly captivated by the realism and the gritty storytelling. Japanese death matches were not just about one man fighting another man. It was about surviving the environment itself. Foley believed that Japan was his destiny, the place where he would make his living. Opportunity struck when Japanese promoters were searching for a foreign talent to enter a rivalry with the legendary Terry Funk. Terry Funk was widely regarded as the absolute master of making an audience suspend their disbelief. He became a crucial mentor to Foley. Together, they embarked on a series of explosive, bloody, and fiery death matches across Japan. Foley was naturally drawn to the extreme, often finishing matches crawling on his hands and knees. To him, this physical destruction was the ultimate proof that he had achieved something special. It was the one arena where he could truly stand out. Because of his unorthodox, violent style, Foley never envisioned himself working for Vince McMahon. During that period, the World Wrestling Federation was far from the gritty, mature product it would later become. It was heavily sanitized, producing a family-friendly, highly guarded television product. Foley's brand of unhinged brutality did not align with the polished superstars the company was heavily marketing. Al Snow, a former superstar and perhaps Foley's closest friend and travel partner, recalled that Vince McMahon simply did not want Mick Foley. The chairman did not believe Foley was marketable. He did not find him physically attractive or suitable for television. It took the persistent intervention of Jim Ross, who served as vice president of talent relations, to change the course of history. Ross pleaded with McMahon to trust his evaluation of talent, insisting that there was something undeniably special about Foley. Ross was tasked with finding compelling opponents for the top stars of the company, specifically The Undertaker. The Undertaker was arguably the most prominent and protected figure in the history of the business. For a long time, management continually fed him giant, lumbering opponents, which resulted in matches that were slow, predictable, and dull. Ross knew that to truly elevate The Undertaker, he did not need another giant. He needed a lunatic. According to backstage lore, McMahon finally relented in a moment of frustration, slamming his hand on a table and agreeing to hire Foley, but under one strict condition. They had to cover his face. McMahon decreed that the audience should not know who he was or anything about his past. In the eyes of the chairman, Foley was a nobody. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer and trusted confidant to McMahon, remembered the monumental challenge this presented. The creative team was ordered to build an entire character out of essentially nothing. From this creative restriction, the character of Mankind was born. Mankind was a deranged, masked intellectual who dwelled in boiler rooms, squealed in pain, and physically mutilated himself by ripping out his own hair. This bizarre, deeply unsettling character would have failed miserably in the hands of any other performer. But Foley possessed a unique ability to forge a profound emotional connection with the audience. Without that connection, all the masks and gimmicks in the world mean nothing. Fans possess an innate ability to sense genuine commitment, and Foley committed every fiber of his being to Mankind. The immediate goal was to establish Mankind as a legitimate, terrifying threat to The Undertaker. Foley, eager to prove his worth, was willing to subject himself to any physical trauma required. As Gerald Briscoe noted, Foley would not turn down any dangerous idea presented to him. This created a terrifying new challenge for the producers. Their primary job became trying to prevent Foley from accidentally killing himself in the ring. The rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker became the cornerstone of the company. They laid an incredible foundation, battling across the globe in 7 major pay-per-view events and 10 television main events. However, as time progressed, Foley felt his character had hit a plateau. He was acutely aware that to maintain his position and solidify his legacy, he needed to do something drastic. He needed to add a monumental chapter to their shared history, rather than letting the rivalry slowly fade into obscurity. Approaching the King of the Ring event in 1998, the producers decided to reignite the bitter feud using a recently introduced, highly dangerous match concept, Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, steel cage matches in the World Wrestling Federation required competitors to escape either by climbing over the top or walking through the door. The Hell in a Cell concept revolutionized this by adding a roof. Once the combatants entered, they were trapped. It was a visual representation of absolute finality. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match had taken place between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. To this day, many wrestling historians consider it a technical masterpiece and a pivotal mile marker for the industry. Foley himself was in absolute awe of that first encounter, admitting that he physically could not perform the athletic feats that Michaels and The Undertaker executed so flawlessly. Knowing that he was slated to face The Undertaker in the second ever Hell in a Cell match, Foley felt an immense, crushing pressure. He sought counsel from his mentor, Terry Funk. When asked for advice on how to possibly top the first match, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match on the very top of the cage roof, and that Foley should allow himself to be thrown off. Funk meant it as a dark joke, but as Funk stopped laughing, Foley looked back at him with absolute seriousness and stated that he believed he could actually survive that fall. From that moment on, Foley could not banish the terrifying idea from his mind. He meticulously pitched the concept to both Vince McMahon and The Undertaker, casually dropping the idea of being hurled off a 20-foot structure in a casual conversation. It was a masterful act of persuasion. The Undertaker, understandably, was highly reluctant to participate in an act that could easily result in manslaughter on live television. Foley, however, was resolute. Eventually, through sheer persistence and bringing other officials on board, Foley got the green light. Foley was not approaching this stunt as a catalyst for a second act in his career. His mindset was far darker. He viewed it as a desperate measure to keep his head above water. In his heart, he believed that when his current run with the company concluded, his entire career would be finished. When asked if he fully comprehended what Foley was planning, The Undertaker confirmed that Foley had outlined the major stunts and promised he would be fine. The Undertaker possessed an immense trust in Foley, operating under the belief that if Foley could visualize a stunt, he could safely execute it. The gravity of the situation was palpable to everyone involved. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, calling the action at ringside, repeatedly emphasized the unprecedented danger. The pressure on Foley was monumental. He was stepping into the shadow of Shawn Michaels, a far more agile and gifted athlete. Foley knew his limitations, yet he felt a profound obligation to deliver a spectacle that would permanently etch his name in the annals of history. The warning was clear. The loser of this match might bypass the hospital and go straight to the morgue. It was a stark reminder to be careful what you wish for. As June 28th arrived, 16,000 rabid fans packed the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Backstage, Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, sat in the production area with Gerald Briscoe. They were positioned in front of dozens of monitors, acting as the pilots for the broadcast. No one in the arena, or watching around the world, had any true anticipation of the horror they were about to witness. Even veteran broadcasters like Jim Ross were kept completely in the dark. Foley wanted to shock the world, to initiate a match in a manner that had never been attempted in the history of the sport. When Foley's music hit, instead of entering the imposing steel structure, he began to scale the outside wall. A wave of collective shock washed over the arena. The commentators questioned his sanity. He was supposed to start inside the cage. What was he doing? It defied all logic. Despite his bravado in pitch meetings, Foley harbored a dark secret as he climbed. He was absolutely terrified of heights. He had assured McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable up there, but the truth was, he had never stood on top of the cell before. As The Undertaker made his long, ominous entrance, Foley stood alone on the roof. His internal monologue was not one of triumph, but of panic. He desperately tried to calculate a way to gracefully climb back down without completely ruining his reputation and his career. He was daring The Undertaker to meet him in the sky. The match officially commenced 16 feet in the air. Immediately, a psychological terror gripped the audience. The structure itself was compromised. The roof of the cell was fastened with zip ties. With 600 pounds of human mass moving across the unstable mesh, the structural integrity began to fail. With every step the two heavyweights took, the fencing bowed downward by a terrifying 12 inches. Those watching closely could hear the distinct, terrifying sound of zip ties snapping under the immense pressure. The mesh was giving way. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on top of the sagging roof, but The Undertaker wisely blocked the maneuver. Realizing there was a very real possibility that the impact would send them both plummeting through the steel and down to the ring below, the brawl migrated toward the very edge of the structure, directly above the broadcast tables. Backstage, producers and agents watched with bated breath, convincing themselves that it was merely a tease. Surely, Foley would not take a bump from that height. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Looking down, the announcer tables appeared as small as dollhouse furniture. It seemed impossible to calculate a safe trajectory. But the closer they moved to the precipice, the more horrifyingly clear it became that Foley was entirely committed to the unimaginable. And then it happened. The Undertaker seized Foley, lifted him, and hurled a 300-pound man off the edge of the cell. Foley plummeted almost 20 feet through the air, hurtling directly toward the Spanish broadcast table. Time seemed to fracture. For those watching, the fall felt as though it occurred in agonizing slow motion. Yet it was over in the blink of an eye. The impact was cataclysmic. A sickening crash echoed through the arena as Foley shattered the table, his body absorbing a kinetic force comparable to a 25-mile-per-hour automobile collision. The immediate reaction was absolute, paralyzing horror. The locker room erupted in sheer panic. It was not a wrestling bump. It was akin to witnessing a fatal car crash. The silence of the stunned crowd was pierced by the frantic voices of the broadcast team questioning what they had just seen. The sound of Foley's body destroying the table chilled the blood of every veteran in the building. Many people, including his own family watching at home, legitimately believed they had just watched a man die. In an industry built on controlled risks, this was an unprecedented leap into the abyss. It shattered the boundaries of sanity. For a long, agonizing moment, Foley lay motionless in the wreckage. Everyone assumed it was over. There was no conceivable way a human being could survive that impact and rise again. An audible gasp of horror swept through the crowd. At home, Colette Foley sat with their two young children. Unable to process the violence, she repeated the standard defense mechanism, assuring her children that it was all fake, all acting. But deep in her own mind, she was consumed by terror. The line between performance and tragedy had been obliterated. The trajectory of the fall was perilous. Had The Undertaker thrown him a fraction too far or too short, Foley would have struck solid concrete or tumbled directly into the front row of spectators. In the immediate aftermath of the fall, Foley did not feel the physical agony. He was buoyed by a massive surge of adrenaline. He had accomplished a legendary feat. Against all odds, the execution of the table spot was flawless. He had visualized the rotation in his mind, turning mid-air to ensure he landed perfectly flat on the desk, utilizing the breaking wood to cushion his fall and spare his life. Backstage, the production team immediately shifted into crisis management mode, replaying the catastrophic visual from every available camera angle. Hugo Savinovic, the Spanish commentator, had barely managed to dive out of his chair before Foley obliterated his workspace. It was a deeply traumatic moment for the personnel at ringside, torn between their genuine concern for their friend and the strict industry rule dictating that you do not interfere with a match while it is in progress. Medical personnel and officials swarmed the wreckage. Terry Funk was the first to reach his fallen friend, desperately checking to see if Foley was even conscious. In the backstage medical area, Dr. Francois Petit was urgently summoned over the radio. Petit, a highly skilled physician with a background in martial arts, was an essential asset to the company, known for his ability to reset bones and patch up broken bodies. But this was beyond a routine injury. Foley had landed violently on his back, exacerbating a severely dislocated shoulder. The emergency medical technician struggled to navigate a gurney through the chaotic ringside area. In a surreal scene, the Hell in a Cell structure had to be mechanically raised, with The Undertaker still standing ominously on the roof to allow the medical team access. Foley was strapped to the board. The narrative of the match seemed definitively closed. The audience watched in respectful, stunned silence as the broken gladiator was wheeled toward the exit, headed for a trauma center. But as the gurney rolled up the aisle, the adrenaline raging within Foley triggered a terrifying realization. He understood that the longer he remained on television in that vulnerable state, the more deeply the audience became invested. With an unsettling smile, he made an incomprehensible decision. He rolled off the gurney. He pushed past the medical staff, ignored the pleas of his peers, and began marching back toward the ring. Complete disbelief washed over the arena. Backstage personnel screamed at the monitors, begging him to stay down, to go to the hospital. How could a man whose body was just shattered possess the physical capability to climb back up the steel mesh? It defied medical logic. Foley himself admitted that he had no idea how he was going to execute the rest of the match and survive. But he had made a solemn pledge to deliver a masterpiece, and he refused to break it. It was an act of pure, terrifying insanity. But in that exact moment, as he scaled the cage with a dislocated shoulder, the perception of Mick Foley fundamentally changed. He transcended being merely a wrestler. He became a star of mythological proportions. The locker room emptied. The backstage area was packed with talent watching the monitors, completely aware that the situation had spiraled completely out of control. While the first fall was a carefully calculated, albeit highly dangerous, stunt, the second act of the tragedy was a genuine disaster. Foley reached the roof once more. The plan, as they had previously agreed, was for The Undertaker to execute a choke slam onto the mesh. They believed the chain link would gradually tear under the impact, allowing Foley to be safely lowered into the ring, creating a memorable visual of him dangling upside down. That is not what happened. The Undertaker hoisted Foley by the throat and slammed him down. The compromised zip ties gave way instantly, completely failing under the force. The mesh panel tore away entirely, and Foley plummeted straight through the roof like a stone. This was no table crash. There was no wood to break his fall. Foley fell directly from the ceiling of the cage and impacted the ring mat with sickening force. The ring mat is not a soft cushion beneath a thin layer of padding lies hard, unforgiving wood and steel. Hitting that mat from such a height is akin to falling directly onto cement. To compound the nightmare, a heavy steel folding chair that had been resting on the roof fell through the hole directly behind him. As Foley violently struck the mat, the steel chair plummeted down and smashed directly into his face. This was the moment the illusion truly died. The reaction was no longer shock. It was profound, genuine horror. The commentators lost their composure. Backstage, the production team frantically tried to contact executives, desperately seeking permission to stop the broadcast. At home, the facade of acting could no longer protect Foley's family. He lay in the center of the ring, completely lifeless and motionless. It was a scenario that no one had anticipated. The general consensus among those watching was that Mick Foley had just been killed on live television. Colette Foley was paralyzed by fear and fury. She felt profoundly betrayed, believing her husband had lied to her about the inherent dangers of the match. The impact knocked Foley completely unconscious. It was the first time in his grueling career that he had been legitimately knocked out cold. Panic consumed the officials. Dr. Petit, Terry Funk, and McMahon rushed the ring. Looking into Foley's eyes, there was nothing but a vacant, terrifying emptiness. Dr. Petit turned to The Undertaker and explicitly demanded that the match be stopped. Recognizing that Foley's brain was utterly unresponsive, the angle of his landing had been so grotesque that his survival seemed miraculous. Standing on the roof, peering down through the torn mesh, The Undertaker shouted down to Terry Funk, demanding to know if his friend was even breathing. Funk confirmed that he was, but the situation was dire. For 42 agonizing seconds, Foley was lost to the void. To buy the medical team precious time, Terry Funk made a split-second, unscripted decision. He attacked The Undertaker, forcing the giant to defend himself, and successfully drawing the camera's focus away from the lifeless body of his friend. It was a masterclass in improvisation under the most stressful conditions imaginable. In modern times, medical protocols would have instantly terminated the contest. But in 1998, the culture of the business dictated that matches were rarely stopped. They simply bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his vision was clouded. The first thing he registered were the shoes of Terry Funk. Slowly, the horrific reality of his situation dawned on him. Against all medical advice and common sense, he forced himself to stand. How his shattered body managed to obey his commands remains a mystery. He was a terrifying sight. The steel chair had caused catastrophic damage. As he struggled to maintain his balance, Foley's instinct as a performer took over. He realized he had a massive, gaping wound completely piercing his lower lip. In a grotesque display of showmanship, he forced his tongue through the bloody hole, smiled through the agony, and created one of the most haunting, unforgettable images in television history. But the horror did not stop there. The impact of the chair had violently knocked out 2 of his front teeth. Bizarrely, one of those teeth was now visibly lodged inside his nasal passage. Medical experts later hypothesized that the tooth had been knocked down his throat, but because he was gasping for air so violently, he had actually inhaled it back up into his nasal cavity. The concern etched on the faces of everyone in the ring was not a performance. It was a raw, human reaction to a man destroying himself. Yet, despite being heavily concussed and severely injured, Foley refused to let the match end without fulfilling his final, excruciating promise. He demanded the thumbtacks. He emptied a bag of thousands of metal thumbtacks onto the canvas. Operating on sheer muscle memory and adrenaline, he engaged The Undertaker once more, intentionally throwing his own bare back into the sea of spikes. He rolled frantically, ensuring his flesh absorbed as much punishment as possible. When the adrenaline takes over, the performer becomes one with the pain, pushing boundaries they are entirely unaware they are crossing. Finally, after 17 excruciating minutes, The Undertaker delivered a final maneuver and secured the victory, ending the nightmare. The Pittsburgh crowd of 16,000 stood in silent awe of the spectacle they had just witnessed. When the medical team brought a stretcher down the aisle for a second time, Foley, true to his legendary status, waved it off. He refused to be carried out. He walked out under his own power, draped in his own blood and embedded with tacks. The arena erupted in an absolute frenzy of respect and adulation. The fans realized that what they had witnessed was as real as a heart attack. Foley's absolute refusal to quit, his willingness to sacrifice his physical health for their entertainment, forged an unbreakable bond. He proved that endangering his well-being allowed the audience to thoroughly believe in him. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of intense relief and grave concern. When Foley finally crossed back through the curtain, he was mobbed by his peers, all desperate to confirm he was truly alive. Vince McMahon, the man who had once refused to hire him, was the first to approach. McMahon looked at his broken warrior and thanked him profoundly for everything he had done for the company, but immediately followed it with a stern demand. He made Foley promise never to do anything like that ever again. Foley was so deeply concussed that as Dr. Petit was physically plucking bloody thumbtacks from his skin, Foley turned to The Undertaker and asked if they had remembered to do the thumbtack spot. He had absolutely no memory of the final moments of the match. The physical toll was staggering. Foley suffered a severely dislocated jaw. He endured a dislocated shoulder. He suffered a badly bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks. He required 15 stitches to close the gaping hole beneath his lip. He lost 2 teeth. And most frighteningly, he suffered a severe concussion, the treatment of which remains a blur in medical records. That night, his wife had to physically undress him and place him into bed. Despite the unimaginable pain, the match served its purpose. It completely transformed the trajectory of his career. 6 months after being deemed unmarketable by the chairman, Mick Foley achieved the impossible. He became the World Wrestling Federation champion. But success in wrestling is a double-edged sword. The reaction, the adrenaline, and the rush became an addictive poison. Foley had successfully raised the bar, but the tragic reality of his character meant that whatever he did next had to be even more extreme. He felt an agonizing pressure to constantly live up to his moniker as the hardcore legend. He pushed the very limits of human physical endurance, firmly believing he owed it to his opponents and his fans to deliver unprecedented spectacles. Jim Ross issued a dire warning to Foley, cautioning him that if he continued this self-destructive path, the bill would eventually come due. Foley understood the logic, but he vehemently disagreed with the philosophy. Just 7 months after Hell in a Cell, Foley pushed his battered body back to the absolute brink. He engaged in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. The stipulations were terrifying. There would be no referee stoppage for excessive blood loss. Those close to him explicitly told him it was a horrible idea, but Foley was riding a tidal wave of momentum and refused to back down. The match was a bloodbath. Foley explicitly instructed The Rock not to hold back, to legitimately lay into him with a steel chair. The original plan called for 5 chair shots to the head. Instead, as his family watched from the front row, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected, devastating steel chair strikes to his skull. His wife and young children were subjected to the horrific sight of their father being beaten into a bloody, unmoving pulp. They were too young to separate the fictional storyline from the very real trauma being inflicted upon his brain. The footage of that match remains sickening to watch. It raises deeply uncomfortable questions about the ethics of the industry. Foley willingly sustained legitimate brain damage for the sake of a television storyline. His daughter, Noelle, confessed a heartbreaking reality. She has absolutely no memory of her father ever wrestling. The psychological trauma of watching him endure such horrific beatings caused her mind to block out his entire in-ring career. She rightfully pointed out that enduring 11 consecutive chair shots to the head could easily kill a normal human being. Foley's relentless drive to over-deliver ultimately forces everyone to ask if the cost was too high. He fully understood that his chosen style guaranteed a lifetime of physical agony. He admitted that there were countless times he could have altered a maneuver to protect himself, but consciously chose not to, simply because the violent alternative looked better on television. Doctors repeatedly pleaded with him to retire, warning him that continuing to perform would leave him permanently crippled. But the roar of the crowd was a siren's song. Foley believed he always had one good match left in him, desperately trying to delay his inevitable physical decline. He routinely competed when he had no medical business being in a ring. He suffered concussion upon concussion. The brain trauma compounded to the point where he would drive around his own neighborhood, completely unable to remember where his own house was located. Eventually, an independent neurologist delivered the devastating verdict. After examining his deteriorating cognitive state, the doctor explicitly warned Foley that he should never wrestle again. Regardless of what any company-affiliated doctor might say, the bill that Jim Ross warned him about has finally arrived. The bumps taken in a wrestling ring are not staged. They are the equivalent of enduring constant 25-mile-per-hour car crashes. Foley is now paying a severe price for his fame and his desire to entertain. The shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease caused by repetitive trauma, looms large over his life. It is a terrifying reality. His family lives in constant, agonizing fear of what his neurological state will be in 10 or 20 years. Foley himself admits that he is deeply afraid of the future. The fallout from the damage he inflicted upon himself is inescapable. Yet, true to his fighting spirit, he refuses to surrender to the darkness. He combats the cognitive decline by keeping his mind active, performing spoken word shows across the globe, standing on a stage, sharing his stories, and hearing the crowd chant for him provides the vital mental gymnastics and emotional stimulation he needs to keep moving forward. He refuses to live in complete fear of the unknown, choosing instead to appreciate the life he built. Colette supports him, encouraging him to enjoy his legacy while gently reminding him not to push his luck any further. The paradox of professional wrestling is that performers dress in wild costumes and engage in a fantasy form of combat that leaves them physically shattered, all to earn the fleeting acceptance of total strangers. For Mick Foley, his entire existence was validated by those reactions. The roar of the crowd was the ultimate narcotic. He admits that his desire for authentic connection and his desperate need to be loved drove him to sacrifice his physique. But he also acknowledges that you cannot condemn his methods without recognizing that they were the exact reason for his massive success. For many years, Foley harbored a deep resentment toward Hell in a Cell. Despite his numerous championships, his best-selling novels, and his extensive charity work, he felt trapped by the shadow of that single night. He fell into a dark depression, feeling that despite all his efforts, he was only known for falling off a cage. It took a poignant conversation with The Undertaker to change his perspective. The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. It was a masterpiece of human endurance that would echo through eternity. That realization allowed Foley to finally embrace the match, recognizing that creating immortal moments was the very reason he entered the business in the first place. His legacy is secure. He will forever be remembered as a man who literally gave his blood, sweat, and brain tissue to the industry. The gravity of his survival was perfectly encapsulated during a visit to the WWE archival warehouse. Walking through the aisles with his daughter, Foley unexpectedly came face to face with the original Hell in a Cell structure. As he reached out and touched the cold steel, the emotional weight of his history crashed down upon him. He began to weep. It was a profound, life-changing moment. To realize how close he came to dying, to look at the rust and the metal and understand the true cost of his legacy was overwhelming. Looking back, Foley acknowledges that there is no financial reward or championship title significant enough to justify the risks he took. Armed with modern medical knowledge regarding head injuries, he cannot definitively say he would have altered his path. He viewed the wrestling ring as a violent canvas, a place where he could create surreal, sublime performance art. It was a magical, albeit incredibly destructive, way to make a living. And on nights like June 28, 1998, when the danger was real and the crowd was deafening, it provided one of the most powerful, intoxicating feelings in the world. The story of Hell in a Cell is not just a story about a wrestling match. It is a harrowing examination of the human condition, a study of what a man will endure to feel loved, and a terrifying reminder of the permanent scars left behind when the cheering finally stops. Ladies and gentlemen, step back with me into the shadows of professional wrestling history. We are looking at a date permanently etched into the minds of anyone who has ever followed this grueling industry. June 28, 1998. The World Wrestling Federation presented its King of the Ring pay-per-view event. On that specific night, one matchup would earn its place as perhaps the most shocking, the most terrifying spectacle in the annals of sports entertainment. It was The Undertaker standing across from Mankind, locked inside the unforgiving steel of Hell in a Cell. The very name, Hell in a Cell, hits you like a heavy mallet to the consciousness. As analysts and observers, we all knew the broadcast was going to be chaotic, but absolutely no one knew it was going to push the very limits of human mortality. You had two phenomenal talents out there who liked to push the envelope until it teetered and plummeted straight over the edge. People often say professional wrestling is a scripted performance. But let me tell you, you cannot fake gravity. In my decades of covering and analyzing this industry, I have been frightened by a lot of things. But nothing frightened me as much as what we witnessed that night in Pittsburgh. Well, nothing frightened me as much until later on in that exact same match. Anyway, what left the fans entirely stunned was the unrelenting punishment that Mick Foley, portraying Mankind, endured until you saw it with your own two eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically take that level of abuse and live to talk about it. The match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. Backstage personnel were screaming, cursing, and calling him a complete idiot, questioning why he was doing this to his body. Today, this infamous match persists as both an epic television success and a grim cautionary tale. As many involved have noted, they dodged several bullets that day. It is truly crazy to analyze how officials would allow a competitor to be knocked completely unconscious and then just continue the matchup. The collateral damage that ensued is an entirely different story. When does it stop? When is it enough? The reality of this business is that you pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But every single one of us needs to ask the fundamental question, was it worth it? To understand the match, we must conduct a psychological analysis of the man behind the mask. Everyone who gets into the professional wrestling industry is looking for something they find missing in their own personal lives. According to Foley himself, he was teased heavily in his youth, developing an overwhelming need to be liked and a burning desire to capture the world championship. He recounts a story from his sophomore year in college. He took a swig of red food coloring, executed a flying leap off a bed onto a stuffed dummy resting on a concrete floor. When he hit the floor, he spat the fake blood concoction out. The entire dormitory was watching. When one of the female students yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a sudden surge of absolute power. His philosophy became clear. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He simply needed to get reactions, and that exact mindset birthed the hardcore legend. Hell in a Cell serves as a perfect, albeit extreme, gateway for new viewers. Many fans cite it as the first match they were ever shown. But the follow-up question must always be, did you expect all matches to be like that? Because they absolutely are not. A standard Mick Foley match was inherently brutal, heavily featuring blood, thumbtacks, fire, and barbed wire. According to documents and historical footage, he put his body through unimaginable torture, including being exploded by C4 explosives in Japan, getting speared through flaming tables, and taking horrifying falls directly onto exposed concrete. His daughter, Noelle Foley, noted that her father simply loved eliciting shock and disgust from the audience. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley did not believe he was delivering a quality performance unless he had physical trouble walking. Back to his hotel room. He claims he did not inherently enjoy the pain, but rather enjoyed the fact that he could endure it and present it to the audience in an entertaining manner. However, the man behind the terrifying personas was drastically different. His wife of over 35 years, Colette Foley, remembers meeting him for the first time. She noticed his eyes and immediately recognized a gentle, genuinely nice person. It was his terrible humor and corny jokes that won her heart. Their wedding song was Even Beauty and the Beast. They functioned as a solid team, and she deeply understood his commitment to his craft. When his adrenaline was pumping, his sole drive was to ensure people left talking about how great the show was, entirely at his own physical risk. Before Mankind, there was Cactus Jack, a wild and crazy persona that made audiences believe the man was legitimately insane. Jim Cornette, a producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, analyzed Foley as an excellent strategist regarding ring psychology. Foley knew fans were captivated by performers who appeared completely out of control and actively went against the script. He could take the audience on a frantic emotional ride, command their absolute attention, and grow his reputation. During those early years, Foley and his wife lived with a mattress on the floor, a small black and white television, and a struggling videocassette recorder. Foley would spend up to 12 hours a day studying Japanese wrestling tapes. He was drawn to the realism and the gritty storytelling where a competitor had to defeat the environment itself. He genuinely believed his career would peak in Japan, especially when promoters sought a foreigner to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk was considered the greatest of all time at making audiences suspend their disbelief. He became a mentor to Foley, and together they engaged in explosive, fiery death matches. Foley found himself constantly drawn to the wild aspects of the sport, often crawling on his hands and knees, viewing the agonizing pain as absolute proof that he had achieved something special. Because of this brutal style, Foley never saw himself as a fit for the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company presented a general audiences rated product. It was a very bland era, and Foley simply did not gel with their corporate image. Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's closest travel partner, noted the uphill battle they faced. The chairman, Vince McMahon, had zero interest in Mick Foley. McMahon did not think Foley was marketable or attractive enough for television. It took Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a gamble. Ross needed fresh, compelling opponents for the top stars. The Undertaker was one of the biggest attractions in the history of the industry, but management kept pairing him with slow, lumbering giants, resulting in dull programming. Ross knew they needed a lunatic. According to sources within those executive meetings, McMahon slammed his hand down on a table and agreed to bring Foley in under one strict condition. They had to cover his face with a mask so the audience would not know who he was. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the monumental challenge of building a character entirely from scratch based on that mandate. Thus, Mankind was born. Briscoe noted that this bizarre concept would not have worked with anyone other than Mick Foley. Without a genuine connection to the audience, a character is meaningless. Foley threw his entire soul into the performance, willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. Ross suddenly found himself with a new challenge, ensuring Foley did not accidentally kill himself in the ring. By 1998, Foley and The Undertaker had laid an incredible foundation over 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches across the globe. But Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he had to do something drastic to add to their legacy. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using the Hell in a Cell concept. Traditionally, cage matches required a competitor to escape over the top or through a door. Foley pitched a different idea to McMahon: put a solid roof on the cage so that 2 men go in and only one comes out. The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had previously inaugurated this match type, setting a nearly impossible standard of excellence. Foley, watching their match in awe, knew he could not outperform them athletically. Seeking advice, he consulted Terry Funk. Funk jokingly suggested that it would be funny if Foley started the match on top of the cell and was thrown off. While Funk meant it as a dark joke, Foley took it seriously. He could not get the idea out of his head. He pitched the concept to McMahon and The Undertaker. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant to throw Foley off the structure, but Foley was dead set on the stunt. Foley did not view this match as the second act of his career. He simply saw it as a desperate way to keep his head above water, believing his run was coming to an end. On June 28th, the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was packed to the rafters. Backstage, referees and producers, including Jimmy Corderas and Gerald Briscoe, were glued to the monitors. Briscoe described himself as the pilot that night, sitting in front of 10 screens. No one knew what to anticipate. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were calling the action at ringside, just as completely in the dark as the fans watching at home. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one had ever done before. As his music hit, there was a visible shock on everyone's faces as he bypassed the door and began climbing the structure. He had assured McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable with heights, but the reality was he was absolutely terrified. The entire time The Undertaker made his entrance, Foley was internally panicking, wondering how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. The match officially began on the roof. The visual created an immediate sense of dread. The crew had attached the top sections of the cage with plastic zip ties, but with nearly 600 pounds of human weight shifting across the mesh, the roof began to sink by a full foot. The sickening sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted a maneuver, but The Undertaker fought out of it, acutely aware that the fragile roof was giving way. They moved toward the edge of the cage, directly above the broadcast tables. From the backstage area, producers watched nervously. They assumed the edge was too dangerous and that Foley would never take the tumble. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Foley looked down at the tiny announcer table, feeling as though he were looking at dollhouse furniture. Then, in an instant, a 300-pound human being was flung from nearly 20 feet in the air. As strange as it sounds to analyze, the fall seemed to occur in slow motion. Yet it was over in the blink of an eye. The horrific crash sent a shockwave through the industry. Backstage, personnel exploded in sheer panic, likening the visual to a fatal car accident. In the arena, there was an audible gasp of horror. People legitimately thought they had just watched a man die. Colette Foley, watching at home with their children, desperately tried to soothe them by claiming it was all fake, despite secretly panicking herself. If The Undertaker had thrown him slightly too far or too short, Foley would have plummeted directly onto the concrete floor or onto the fans. But Foley had envisioned the fall in his head. In midair, he shifted his body, landing as flat as possible on the desk to cushion the impact and save his own life. Hugo Savinovic, the Spanish commentator, had to dive out of his chair to avoid being crushed. Savinovic recalled the trauma of watching his friend lay broken, torn by the strict protocol that announcers must never interfere with the performance. Officials, including Terry Funk, rushed the ringside area. Dr. Francois Petit, the company physician known for his aggressive chiropractic techniques, sprinted from the medical room. Foley had landed terribly on his back, aggravating a dislocated shoulder. Emergency medical technicians brought out a stretcher, struggling to navigate around the massive steel structure. They strapped Foley down, and everyone believed the match was rightfully over. But as they began to wheel him up the aisle, something shifted in Foley's mind. He realized that the longer he remained on television, the more the audience was entirely captivated, defying all logic and ignoring the desperate pleas from officials telling him to stay down. Foley rolled off the stretcher. Driven by adrenaline, he began to climb the massive steel cell a second time. Backstage, seasoned veterans were utterly bewildered, questioning